There's a specific silence that falls over a table when someone you love decides, in front of everyone who matters to them, that you're an embarrassment. I sat in that silence for what felt like a full minute, my fork halfway to my mouth, while my fiancé's family looked between us like they were waiting to see whether I'd cry or laugh it off. My name is Simone. I was 29 years old, engaged for 8 months to a man named Bryce, and sitting at his parents' dining table for what was supposed to be a celebratory dinner announcing our wedding date. Instead, it became the night everything ended. It started innocently enough. Bryce's aunt, a sharp-eyed woman named Pauline who ran her own accounting firm, asked what I did for work. I told her the truth. I managed logistics for a regional shipping company, coordinating routes and inventory for a fleet that moved goods across 3 states. It wasn't glamorous. It paid our bills, mine especially, since I'd been the one covering more than my share of our shared expenses for over a year while Bryce found his footing after leaving his last job. Bryce laughed before I even finished my sentence. "She makes it sound so official," he said, swirling wine like the moment amused him. "Babe, you basically answer phones and yell at truck drivers. Tell them the real title, dispatch coordinator." "It's fine, it's just not exactly what I pictured telling people at our wedding." The table went quiet in that particular way rooms go quiet when everyone senses something happened that shouldn't have, but nobody wants to be the one to name it. His mother, Carlene, gave a small, uncomfortable laugh and changed the subject to flowers. His father didn't look up. Pauline, I noticed, didn't laugh at all. She watched me carefully, the way people watch someone deciding whether to fold or push all their chips forward. I set my fork down. I didn't cry, though my chest was doing something tight and furious that I recognized from every other time in my life I'd been made small in a room and expected to smile through it. "Excuse me," I said, standing. "I need some air." I want you to remember that moment, because I didn't yet know it, but I was about to walk out of that dining room and directly into the biggest year of my life. I stood on Bryce's parents' back porch in the cold, arms wrapped around myself, and I let myself finally feel the full weight of something I'd been quietly ignoring for months. Bryce hadn't always been cruel about my job. When we first met, 3 years earlier, he used to tell people I basically ran half the supply chain for the Eastern Corridor, proud in a way that felt genuine at the time. Something shifted after he lost his own position at a marketing firm 18 months ago, a shift I'd chalked up to a hard season, something a supportive partner pushes through instead of walking away from. I understand now that I'd been mistaking my own patience for his growth. The porch door opened behind me. It was Pauline, holding 2 cups of coffee, handing me one without asking if I wanted it. "He's been like that since he lost his job," she said, not unkindly, just matter-of-fact in a way I appreciated more than sympathy right then. Some men handle feeling small by making sure someone else feels smaller. It's an old trick. Doesn't make it hurt less. "I coordinate logistics for 11 distribution centers," I said, more to myself than to her. "I built the routing system that cut our fuel costs by almost 20% last year. I got recruited twice by competitors in the last 6 months." Pauline raised an eyebrow. "Does Bryce know that?" "I don't think he's asked me a real question about my job in over a year," I said, and saying it out loud made something crack open in my chest that I'd been holding shut for a long time. Pauline was quiet for a moment, studying me in the porch light. "I run a firm that does consulting work for logistics companies. Actually, real coincidence, one of my biggest clients has been trying to poach a regional operations director for months and hasn't found the right fit. Someone who actually understands the ground-level work, not just the spreadsheets." I looked at her, unsure where this was going. "I'm not saying anything else tonight," she said, sliding a card into my coat pocket. "Just, when you're ready to talk about something other than my nephew's terrible manners, call me." I didn't know it yet, standing on that porch with my hands shaking around a coffee cup, but Pauline had just handed me the first thread of the rest of my life. Are you enjoying the story? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. If you're enjoying it so far, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Because believe me, this story is only getting started. Now let's get back into it. I didn't go back inside that dinner. I called a car, went home to the apartment Bryce and I shared, and packed a bag while my hands were still unsteady from adrenaline and something colder underneath it, clarity, maybe, the kind that only shows up after you've been patient for far too long. Bryce texted 11 times before he got home that night. I read every message and answered none of them. Babe, come on, it was a joke. You're being dramatic. Everyone thought it was funny. Where are you? Nobody at that table had laughed, actually. I remembered that clearly, standing in our bedroom folding shirts into a suitcase. Only Bryce had laughed. Everyone else had gone quiet in the particular way people go quiet when they're watching someone get hurt and deciding not to intervene. I stayed with my sister, Danielle, for the first week. She'd never liked Bryce, something she'd kept mostly to herself out of respect for my choices, until the night I showed up at her door with a suitcase and finally told her everything I'd been quietly absorbing for the past year. The comments about my temporary job while he found himself. The way he introduced me at his company holiday party, before he lost that job, as someone who keeps the trucks moving, basically. The slow, steady erosion of being made to feel like my work, and by extension me, was something to be tolerated rather than respected. You know what gets me, Danielle said, handing me a glass of wine on her couch that first night, is that you make more money than he does right now. You have for over a year. And he's the one acting like your job is beneath him. I hadn't said it out loud before, but she was right, and hearing it out loud made something in me go still and sharp. I thought about the card in my coat pocket. Pauline's name, an accounting firm, a phone number. I called her 3 days later, not because I'd fully decided anything yet about Bryce, but because some part of me needed to know what my life could look like if I stopped shrinking myself to fit inside someone else's shame. I wondered when you'd call, Pauline said. Tell me about the routing system. The one that cut fuel costs 20%. I want every detail. For the first time in longer than I could remember, someone wanted to hear about my work like it actually mattered. The client Pauline mentioned turned out to be a mid-sized logistics firm expanding into 3 new states, needing someone who understood both the executive side of operations and the ground-level reality of what actually moved freight on time. I flew out for an interview 2 weeks after that dinner, still technically engaged, still living out of a suitcase at my sister's apartment, still receiving texts from Bryce that had shifted from apologetic to increasingly frustrated. This is ridiculous, Simone. You're punishing me for one comment. Can we please talk like adults? I didn't respond to that one either. I was too busy walking into a conference room with 3 regional directors, laying out exactly how I'd restructured routing for 11 distribution centers, watching their faces shift from polite interest to genuine attention as I got into the specifics. The algorithm adjustments, the driver retention strategy that came from actually listening to the people doing the work, the cost savings that had made my current company's regional VP quietly nervous about losing me to a competitor. I have to ask, one of the directors said near the end, why hasn't your current company promoted you into a director-level role already, with results like this? I thought about the answer honestly for a moment. I think I said slowly, I've spent the last year making myself smaller than my actual work in more places than just my job. They offered me the position 2 days later. Regional Operations Director, a title with actual authority behind it, a salary that nearly doubled what I'd been making, relocation assistance to the city where the role was based, 3 states away from Bryce, from that dinner table. From a life I was starting to realize had been quietly asking me to apologize for my own competence for longer than I wanted to admit. I called my mother before I called Bryce. She'd met him exactly 4 times in 3 years, always polite, always careful, and I could hear something careful in her voice too when I told her about the offer. What does Bryce think? She asked. I haven't told him yet, I said. I wanted to know what I thought first, for once. I met Bryce for coffee, not dinner, not our apartment, neutral ground, my choice, 3 weeks after the night at his parents' table. He looked tired in a way that might have moved me a year earlier. It didn't move me the way he probably expected it to now. I got a job offer, I told him, before he could start another round of apologies I'd already heard 4 different versions of. Regional Operations Director. 3 states away. I'm taking it. He blinked like I'd switched languages mid-sentence. 3 states, Simone, we're getting married. You can't just move 3 states away because of one bad joke at dinner. It wasn't one joke, Bryce, I said, and I felt something steady settle into my voice that hadn't been there in a long time. It was the first time you said the quiet part loud enough for other people to hear it. You've been embarrassed by my job, by me, honestly, since you lost yours. I just finally noticed it happening in a room full of people instead of just in our apartment. That's not fair, he said, but there was something in his eyes that told me he knew, at least partly, that it was. I've been paying more than half our rent for 14 months, I said. I drove you to interviews. I never once made you feel small about needing time to find your footing, because that's what you do for someone you love. And the first time I needed something from you, basic respect, in front of your own family, you made a joke about me answering phones and yelling at truck drivers. He didn't say anything for a long moment, turning his coffee cup slowly on the table. I don't know how to compete with someone whose life just keeps getting bigger while mine feels like it's shrinking, he said finally, quiet, and for the first time all conversation, it sounded almost honest. You were never supposed to be competing with me, I said. That was the whole point of being a team. I think somewhere in the last year, you forgot that, and I let you forget it because I didn't want to make things harder for you. I slid my engagement ring across the table. He didn't reach for it right away. I'm not staying small so you can feel bigger anymore, I said, and I meant it more fully than I'd meant almost anything in my life. The move happened faster than I expected, 6 weeks from offer to relocation, a small apartment in a new city that felt, in those first disorienting days, both terrifying and like the first full breath I'd taken in over a year. Pauline called 2 days after I arrived, just to check in, which surprised me until she explained, half laughing, that she'd been quietly rooting for me since that porch conversation. I've watched my nephew do this before, she admitted. Not this exact thing, but this pattern. He did it to a girlfriend before you, dimmer version of the same story. I always regretted not saying something sooner. I wasn't going to make that mistake twice. My first 90 days in the new role were a kind of professional trial by fire I hadn't fully anticipated. The routing systems I'd inherited were inefficient in ways that were costing the company real money, delayed shipments, driver turnover, a warehouse network that hadn't been optimized in nearly a decade. I threw myself into it the way I'd thrown myself into very little else in the past year, and something in me that had gone quiet during the last stretch of my relationship with Bryce started, slowly, to wake back up. I redesigned the routing algorithm within the first 2 months, cutting average delivery windows by nearly 18%. I restructured the driver retention program based on actual exit interviews nobody had bothered conducting before I arrived, cutting turnover by 1/3 within a single quarter. The regional VP, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Adiz, started including me in strategy meetings that were technically above my pay grade because, as she put it bluntly in a hallway conversation I'll never forget, "You clearly already think like someone 2 levels above the title we gave you." Bryce texted twice more over those first months, each message further apart, each one a little less certain than the last. The final one, for months after I moved, simply read, "I heard you got promoted again already. I'm proud of you, even if I don't have the right to say that anymore. I hope you know I finally understand what I did." I didn't respond to that one either, not out of cruelty, but because I finally understood something Pauline had told me on that porch months earlier. Some understanding doesn't need an audience to be real. It just needs to actually change something in the person who finally arrived at it. 6 months into the new role, Adiz called me into her office on a Tuesday afternoon with an expression I couldn't quite read. "We're opening a 4th regional hub," she said. "Bigger scope, direct oversight of all 4 regions instead of 3. I want you running it." I sat with that for a moment, doing quiet math on how far I'd come in less than a year from a dinner table where I'd been called a phone answerer in front of a room full of strangers, to being handed authority over an entire division of a growing company. "There's something else," Adiz added, sliding a folder across the desk. "Corporate wants to send someone to the industry conference next month to represent the expansion publicly, press, panels, the whole thing. I think it should be you." The conference, it turned out, drew executives and consultants from across the logistics and supply chain industry, a room full of people whose names I recognized from trade publications I'd been quietly reading for years. hungry for a version of my career I hadn't yet believed was possible for someone who'd once been laughed at for yelling at truck drivers. I flew out 3 weeks later, gave a panel talk on driver retention strategy that got picked up by 2 industry newsletters, and shook more hands in 2 days than I had in the entire previous year of my life. Pauline flew in for it too, unprompted, sitting in the third row with an expression of open, unguarded pride that caught me off guard more than almost anything else that weekend. "You know what's funny," she said afterward, over dinner at a restaurant that felt worlds away from that first uncomfortable table months earlier. "Bryce used to be the one everyone assumed would end up successful. Good looks, good school, good job on paper. Nobody ever looked twice at the quiet woman managing the actual machinery that kept his lifestyle running." I think that's exactly why he panicked the way he did that night. Some part of him already knew the truth before you did. I turned that over for a long moment, watching the city lights outside the restaurant window. "I don't feel angry about it anymore," I said, and I realized, saying it, that it was true. I think I actually feel a little sorry for him. He had the version of me who would have stayed small forever if he hadn't pushed too hard, too publicly, that one night. I don't think he understood what he was actually risking. A year to the day after that dinner, I got an email from Carlene, Bryce's mother, that I read 3 times before responding. "Simone, I've wanted to write this for months and kept putting it off out of my own embarrassment." I should have said something at that table. "I've thought about that night more than I've told anyone, including Bryce. I'm proud of what I've heard about your career, even from a distance. I hope you know that silence that night wasn't approval. It was cowardice, and I'm sorry for my part in it. I hadn't expected that, and it moved me more than I let on, even to myself, for a few days." I wrote her back eventually, careful and honest, telling her I appreciated her saying it, that I understood how hard family loyalty can complicate a moment like that, and that I genuinely hoped Bryce was doing better than the version of him I'd last seen across a coffee shop table. I heard, through Pauline, that he was slowly in his own time. A new job, still finding his footing in some ways, but reportedly gentler with himself and with the people around him than he'd been in the year before I left. I didn't need updates on him to feel whole, but I appreciated hearing that whatever happened between us had at least left something useful behind for him, some version of accountability he might not have found otherwise. My own life, in that year, had become something I barely recognized from the outside and fully recognized from the inside, the first version of myself in years that wasn't shaped around making someone else comfortable with my success. I started dating again, cautiously, months later, nothing serious yet, just the slow process of learning what it felt like to be with someone who asked real questions about my work and actually waited for the answers. Pauline and I stayed close in a way neither of us had expected the night she handed me that business card on her back porch. She became something between a mentor and a kind of chosen family, the rare adult in my life who'd seen exactly who I was becoming before I fully saw it myself. "You know what I tell people now," she said to me once, laughing, over one of our regular dinners. "I tell them I discovered you. Like you were some kind of hidden talent nobody else bothered looking for." "You didn't discover me," I told her, smiling. "You just asked me a real question and actually listened to the answer. Turns out that's rarer than people think." 18 months after that dinner, I stood at the front of an industry conference as a keynote speaker instead of a panelist, a milestone that still occasionally caught me off guard when I let myself think about how far the distance actually was between that table and this stage. My talk was about something I hadn't fully planned to talk about when I agreed to the keynote, but that felt necessary once I stood in front of a room of nearly 600 people, many of them women working in operations and logistics roles that history hadn't traditionally respected the way it respected flashier titles. I used to let people define my worth by how impressive my job title sounded at a dinner party, I told the room, my voice steadier than I expected it to be. I spent years making myself smaller in rooms where my actual competence made other people uncomfortable because I thought smallness was the price of being loved. I want to tell you today that it isn't. The room that laughs at your work isn't the room you're supposed to be shrinking yourself to fit into. It's the room you're supposed to eventually outgrow. I watched a woman near the front wipe her eyes, and something in my chest settled in a way it hadn't fully settled since that porch conversation with Pauline 18 months earlier. After the talk, a young woman came up to me, nervous, maybe 23, telling me she worked dispatch for a regional carrier and had been quietly considering going back to school for supply chain management, but her boyfriend kept telling her the job wasn't really a career, just something to do until she figured out what she actually wanted. I gave her my card the way Pauline had once given me hers. "Call me when you're ready to talk about something other than what he thinks your job is worth," I said. "I promise you, the math on that is not his to do." She laughed, surprised, and something about the exchange felt like a full circle closing gently instead of dramatically. Not a revenge story. Not really, even though I know that's how people like to frame it when they hear the broad strokes. It felt more like a debt finally being repaid forward, the way Pauline's kindness on that cold porch had quietly rewritten the entire trajectory of my life. It's been 2 years now since that dinner, since a fork halfway to my mouth, since a laugh that was supposed to make me small and instead, eventually, made me unshakable. I run all 4 regional hubs now. I bought a house 6 months ago on my own, no relocation assistance this time, just my own name on the deed and a mortgage I qualify for entirely on my own income, a fact that still occasionally makes me sit quietly in my kitchen some mornings, coffee in hand, genuinely amazed at the life sitting around me. Bryce and I don't speak, not out of bitterness anymore, just distance and time and 2 very different lives that no longer have a reason to intersect. I heard, through the family grapevine that still occasionally reaches me via Pauline, that he's engaged again, to someone who apparently works in a field he speaks about, this time, with what people describe as genuine pride. I hope that's true. I hope whatever he learned from that dinner table stayed learned. I think about that night less than I used to, and when I do think about it, it doesn't carry the sting it once did. It carries something closer to gratitude, strange as that sounds, because if Bryce hadn't laughed at me in front of a room full of people who chose silence over defending me, I might have spent years more staying small in a life that was quietly asking me to apologize for my own competence. Pauline still says I was the best thing that ever happened to her nephew's love life, even though, especially though, it ended the way it did. Sometimes the kindest thing that happens to a person, she told me once, is watching someone they underestimated walk away and build something extraordinary without them. I didn't set out to win anything that night. I just finally stopped agreeing to lose quietly. But if you're asking whether I know now, looking back at everything that unfolded from one humiliating dinner, the porch conversation, the job offer, the promotion, the keynote stage, the house with only my name on it, whether some part of me wanted Bryce to watch it all happen from a distance and understand exactly what he let walk out the door that night. Yes, I won't pretend otherwise. I let him watch me win. And I've never once regretted giving him that view. The end.